We're supposed to have a malakiya within us, this angelic nature to us, which we have to strive to acquire. Because if we don't, we can come down on what's called the bahimiya, which is becoming like the animals, the animalistic traits. So, for example, not mastering or controlling your anger, being engrossed in fulfilling your desires, the hedonistic lifestyle, which is so pervasive around us in our world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. Welcome back with Shah Dehlavi. In this video, we're going to continue with epistemology, and we're going to be looking at the origin and nature of knowledge. Now, remember, for our scholars, especially the one that we are looking at, Shah Dehlavi, knowledge related to wisdom is fundamental, and wisdom, or the wisdom tradition, or hikmah, is based on divine knowledge. Okay, and knowledge comes to us through a number of ways. So I want you to think about how knowledge can come to humans. Usually we are most familiar with schooling or reading a book or watching something like YouTube. But knowledge in its purest sense can come through revelation, what we call in Arabic wahi. This is revelation through the angel Gabriel. And it's also worth bearing in mind at this point that knowledge, when it comes from God, always comes through an intermediary, that is the angel, in this case, angel Gabriel or Jibreel, may God be pleased with him. But knowledge can also come through inspiration, what's called ilham. So humans can access that. So sometimes God will place something through angels in your heart. You'll get some sort of inspiration. Sometimes you have what's called intuition, for one of a better phrase. And of course, if you think about the Quran and your own personal experience, you can also acquire knowledge through dreams. So you might see something in a dream, and it might transpire to happen later on as a reality. And of course, you can also have mystical experiences. This is when you are so focused on God and you transcend your senses. So you're no longer using your senses to make sense of the world, but you've freed yourself from the burden of the senses and you begin to access the unseen world, if you like, as well. Now remember, human beings at a fundamental level are distinct from animals because we have the ability to acquire more knowledge, and we have a spiritual dimension to our makeup. Remember that we have a connection to God, to the divine reality, through our ruh, through our soul. In a not so distant future, I will look at the near reality of the soul with you. And so our soul is connected to the divine reality, to God, as it's mentioned in the Quran. And of course, He has endowed us with what's called malakiya. Malakiya is what's called angelic qualities. So we have certain qualities that if we work on them, we can enhance them, we can polish them and draw closer to God by imitating the angels who are totally absorbed and in obedience to God. So angels are sort of a pedagogical tool, if you like, as well, in terms of we want to become angelic beings. And if I can just take a moment out, if you think about our daily lives, especially our rituals, they do embody a sense of angelic realities. For example, when our menfolk go to the mosque, they stand in rows and they stand next to each other, right? That's like observing the divine realm. So we're meant to stand in front of God in unison. If you think about when we go for Umrah and when we circumnavigate the Kaaba, and we're going around the Kaaba because the angels doing it at the same place in the Baytul Ma'mur, this place which is high in the heavens. 70,000 angels go around that place, never ever to return again. So in many ways, we imitate the angelic beings, the malakiya. And we're supposed to have a malakiya within us, this angelic nature to us, which we have to strive to acquire. Because if we don't, we can come down on what's called the bahimiyya, which is becoming like the animals, the animalistic traits. So, for example, not mastering or controlling your anger, being engrossed in fulfilling your desires, the hedonistic lifestyle, which is so pervasive around us in our world. So we have this ability to become angelic, but we also have another gift that God has uniquely endowed human beings with, which is the intellect. That we are rational human beings. We can reflect, we can theorize, we can make things, we can imagine things, we can discuss things. So we have this intellect which allows us to think about things. If you just think about the world that we live in, we are the only species, we are the only type of creature that's been able to achieve so much. We have mastery over every other creature, whether even it's creatures that are stronger than us. For example, the elephant is much more stronger than us, but we are able to control the elephant, if you like. We have animals that are much more fearsome than us, but we're able to gain mastery over them. This is by virtue of this ability that God has given to us, which is the intellect. But of course, when we have this angelic disposition, we have this rational soul and this spiritual connection, God has also endowed us with knowledge that allows us to survive and live in this world. So, of course, we are to procreate and continue the human species. That's to do with your family, but also to do with civilization ideas. So we need farmers, we need people that can cultivate land, we need craftspeople, we need doctors, we need engineers. God has created within us the knowledge to acquire all of these sciences and to practice them so that we can support one another. We can't live a sort of existence on our own. We are fundamentally dependent on fellow human beings. Right? I don't have time to invent a camera and teach at the same time and be a father and do this, that, the other. But what we do is by human nature, we are reliant on one another. This is civilizational ideas and civilizational ethos. So while we are supposed to individually become people who connect to God, inner purification. At the same time, we are not separate from civilization. This is why Islam is so unique, because in a modern society, it's about individualism. It's all about me, my needs, my feelings, my emotions, absent of the needs of other people. That fundamentally doesn't work, because Muhammad might have a need that clashes with my need. So how do we negotiate that? Right? Somebody might have another desire which clashes with my desire. So the Sharia says to us, well, you have your own needs, but your needs have to be in conversation and respect the needs of other people. This is why fiqh is very, very important. I said to someone recently that fiqh is all about interdependence. How do we live with one another? Whereas modernity is about independence. It's about me, me, me. But Sharia, Islam is about interdependence. How do we live with one another? So according to Shah Waliullah Dehlavi, the first man, Adam, may God be pleased with him, God endowed him with the basic necessary knowledge for basic tools like sowing, maybe reaping, threshing, cattle breeding, cooking of food, and all of these things that we need to survive. These are basic essential items and knowledge that we need just to survive as human beings. Imam Ghazali, for example, mentions that without worldly knowledge, without knowledge of this world, there is no religion. Because if people can't survive, if people can't put food on the table, how are they going to focus on their relationship with God? So the world is needed as a support for the religion to inspire and spread amongst humanity. But also God didn't just give us knowledge about basic necessities, He also gave us the ability of speech, the ability to communicate, that we are able to put sounds together, letters together, and make them coherent. This is beautiful. No other creature can do this. We take letters, we take sounds, and we produce wonderful speech by combining them together. So we're able to speak with one another, we're able to communicate with one another, we're able to understand one another. And also God taught us the importance of procreation, the importance of marriage, and marriage is about procreation, for example. And also God taught us about daily rituals. And so in short, Adam, the first human archetype, was given all the knowledge that was useful and necessary for establishing a flourishing human race on earth. But God also gave us intellectual power, as I mentioned earlier. And so we're just not about fulfilling our desires and making money and enjoying ourselves, but we also think about some of the big questions. This is what this series is really about. So humans are naturally predisposed to thinking about big questions, and it's kind of odd today because we're too busy with our iPhones and enjoying ourselves. But really, every civilization, without exception, every civilization with great thinkers have always reflected upon the purpose of their creation, about looking at the cosmos and realizing when you look at the stars and the planets, there's something greater out there than the sum of human beings. And so they come to realize that there's a divine power which had brought everything into existence. And so all the intellectual sciences, according to Shah Waliullah, according to one place he mentions this. In fact, he mentions this in his important book Ta'wilatul Ahadith, where he says that all these sciences, the intellectual sciences such as physics, metaphysics, logic, astronomy, medical sciences, astrology, mathematics, all these sciences that we needed to succeed in the world were first given to the Prophet Idris. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. And so knowledge required when it comes to social and economic progress, ethics, tawheed, monotheism, all of this were given to prophets over time as well. As time progressed, every prophet was given specific knowledge that was needed for that society at that moment in time. This is the basics. But how does God give us this knowledge? How does knowledge descend upon earth? Well, I talked about in previous videos, and I will talk about it in more detail later on, that when God sends down knowledge, what's called tajalli, and this idea of descending knowledge, it goes through what's called the mala'ul a'la. This is what's called the highest plane, where angelic beings, pure human beings, and angels of the highest pedigree exist. And what he does is he sends knowledge to them, and from them it comes down to human beings. And people receive this knowledge by way of sort of impression on their hearts. So it's not taught to them. They don't receive this knowledge through education like we're used to, but Allah, what he does is he engraves it on their soul. So knowledge is something that God puts into their hearts through angels and pious beings. It's a bit like engraving on wax, for one of a better example. Wax by nature allows things to be inscribed upon it. And this comes from the Mala'ul A'la, and I mentioned that this knowledge is called Ilmul Huzuri. In the previous video we talked about Ilmul Husuli and Ilmul Huzuri. Ilmul Husuli is acquired knowledge. That's the most common type of knowledge. We read things, we watch things, we go to school, we go to madrasa, and we acquire knowledge, knowledge acquisition. But ilmul husuli is knowledge that's not acquired. It just comes. It comes to you. I'll talk about this in the next video in a little bit more detail. It's something that's just imprinted upon you. You just know about it. It's not something that's acquired. It's not kasbi, as we say, but it's something that just presents itself in the subject, in yourself. And so this is sacred nature of knowledge, and this knowledge that God presents in his creation, the children of Adam, is with God eternally present. So knowledge, if you like, when you think about Allah, our creator, God, knowledge is not created in him. God already knew about everything because he's alim. When we acquire knowledge, this is the difficulty for lots of us, when we acquire knowledge, we acquire it in time. But God already knew everything. So God, it's not like God knew about things, or he learns about things and he passes it down. God already in pre-eternity knew about everything. So all knowledge that comes is not passing, it's not created for God. Remember, for God and us, we're separate, right? In terms of thinking about knowledge. We acquire knowledge. For God, there's no acquisition of knowledge, because that means, and this is why it's a problem for God, if you say God acquires knowledge, there must have been a period then when God didn't know anything, and God can't be like that. There can't be a period for God where he didn't know something and now he knows about it, right? Because that would, na'udhu billahi min zalik, that would imply that he was ignorant of something. So God's knowledge is pre-eternal. He already knew about everything. So what God does is that he sends that knowledge down to us in time, and we receive it. In one way we receive it, what's called ilmul huduri or ilmul husuli. God gives us this knowledge. So I hope that makes sense, that distinction, that through the angelic realm, this mala'ul ala, we acquire knowledge in time, but knowledge in of itself with God is always eternally present. So in other words, knowledge was already there. What we know now It's not something that for us we know it in time, but already God knew about everything in pre-eternity. So this is a gift that God gives. In one place, Imam Shah Waliullah talks about it as khairul kathir, this abundant good. Allah mentions this in the Quran as well. And so this knowledge is not really created. It's fascinating. When we say we came to learn of something, we came to learn of it in this world. But what we came to learn already existed with God. Right? It's God's mercy that He gave us that knowledge of it. So knowledge is eternal with Allah. With Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For us, because we are created beings and God did give us certain knowledge, we forget about things. So I'm talking about, for example, when in the Quran God talks about how He presented Himself, and we were presented before God, and we all testified to God's omnipotence. We forgot about it. So it's not like we didn't know about it, we forgot about it, and God's mercy was that He sent prophets to us to remind us. So for with God, His knowledge is pre-eternal. He knows everything. There's no period where He didn't know about something. So knowledge with Allah is always present. That's very, very important. It's not distinct from Him. It's not something that you acquire. Right? For example, let me give you one final example. If I was to take this bottle here of perfume, I acquire it because it exists outside of me, right? And before I didn't know about it. I didn't know what a bottle of attar was until I saw it for the first time. But God already knew about it. God already knew things because God's knowledge is internal within Him. And because God is eternal or pre-eternal, then knowledge is also pre-eternal because it's an attribute of His. And God's attributes are pre-eternal with Him, Jalla wa ala. Hope that makes sense. And of course, this agrees with many other people who talk about God's knowledge being pre-eternal. We'll talk about this in more detail next video, inshallah. In the next video, we're going to be talking about some of the definitions of knowledge. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
جئت إليك ذليلا أناجي من لي غير